Hello, friends, and welcome to Civil War Rarities. We thank you for joining us, and we kindly ask you to please share, like, and subscribe to help grow our channel. Now, on to the show.
Season 1, Episode 3, My Last Nerves, a medical re-examination of a long-standing Shiloh myth. Today we are investigating a long-standing myth from the American Civil War regarding the death of Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston at the Battle of Shiloh on April 6, 1862. For over a century and a half, conventional history has held that an old dueling wound to his hip prevented Johnston from feeling the fatal bullet that ultimately cost him his life. We will dissect this narrative utilizing modern medical analysis, military doctrine from the U.S. Army's Staff Ride Handbook for Shiloh, and recent historical reassessments found in Lee S. Goggins' book, Reckless in Their Statements. Let us begin by setting the stage. By early 1862, General Albert Sidney Johnston commanded all Confederate forces from Arkansas to the Cumberland Gap. The strategic situation was dire for the Confederacy in the Western Theater. Following the loss of Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, Johnston desperately needed a decisive victory to stabilize the front. Consequently, he concentrated his forces and launched a massive surprise attack against Major General Ulysses S. Grant's army. Grant's forces were encamped at Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, near a small log meeting house named Shiloh Church. During the intense fighting on the afternoon of April 6th, the Union forces made a stubborn and heroic stand in a dense thicket that would become famously known as the Hornet's Nest. Seeing his frontline attacks stalling against the withering Union fire, General Johnston took it upon himself to personally ride forward and rally his men. He successfully led a charge by the 45th Tennessee Infantry Regiment. Amidst the chaotic and smoke-filled melee, a stray bullet struck Johnston behind his right knee. The projectile penetrated the popliteal fossa region and severed his right popliteal artery. Because the wound was in the back of the knee, it went largely unnoticed by Johnston's staff in the heat of battle. Johnston continued to sit upright in his saddle, issuing orders, until he began reeling from massive, catastrophic blood loss. He was helped from his horse by his aides, and he bled to death shortly after in a nearby ravine near a creek. He became the highest-ranking officer on either side to die in combat during the Civil War. For decades, historians and medical professionals have tried to explain why a commanding general would sit upon his horse and bleed to death without ever noticing he had been shot. The prevailing theory pointed back to a duel from his youth. Though sometimes mistakenly referenced as occurring in 1847 during his Mexican-American War service, the fateful duel actually took place a decade earlier on February 5, 1837. Johnston fought a duel with a disgruntled officer named Felix Huston, as we mentioned in episode number 2. During this encounter 25 years before Shiloh, Johnston received a severe gunshot wound to the pelvis. The injury damaged but did not sever his sciatic nerve. Historical accounts have long asserted that this nerve damage left Johnston with a permanent loss of feeling in his right leg. Consequently, the popular legend claims that because his leg was completely numb, Johnston could not feel the bullet tear into his popliteal artery at Shiloh, causing him to ignore the fatal wound until it was simply too late. However, modern medical science strongly refutes this romanticized narrative. A comprehensive 2008 study published in the journal Neurosurgery, titled "Albert Sidney Johnston's Sciatic Dueling Injury Did Not Contribute to His Death at the Battle of Shiloh," conducted a thorough review of Johnston's medical history and the primary source documents of the battle. The medical researchers concluded that while Johnston was indeed severely injured in the 1837 duel, his recovery was nearly complete, allowing him to return to a fully active military life. Over the subsequent 25 years, he exhibited only mild symptoms, such as an occasional limp during overexertion and intermittent foot pain or numbness. The modern medical analysis indicates that his symptoms resembled sciatic nerve entrapment or partial injury, rather than a total transection of the nerve. Crucially, the researchers noted that there are absolutely no historical descriptions of Johnston suffering from complete anesthesia or total numbness in the distribution of the posterior femoral cutaneous nerve. If he had completely lost sensation in his posterior leg and buttocks, he would have likely suffered from chronic pressure sores from his long and frequent horse rides, yet no such ailments were ever recorded by his physicians. Therefore, the medical conclusion is clear. The dueling injury was not sufficient to cause total sensory loss in the popliteal fossa. While the old wound left him mildly impaired, it cannot explain a complete inability to feel a bullet severing a major artery on the battlefield. So, if nerve damage did not mask the pain, what did? To answer this, we turn to the realities of combat trauma and the tactical situation described in the U.S. Army Staff Ride Handbook for the Battle of Shiloh. In the heat of such intense combat, a well-documented physiological phenomenon known as stress-induced analgesia occurs. Massive, instantaneous surges of adrenaline and endorphins can completely mask the pain of severe traumatic injuries. Soldiers frequently sustain devastating gunshot wounds without realizing they have been hit until the skirmish ends or they collapse from systemic shock. Johnston, intensely focused on directing his troops and breaking the Union line, simply did not register the physical impact in the adrenaline-fueled frenzy of the charge. Furthermore, the medical realities of a severed popliteal artery mean the timeline of his death may have been misunderstood by past historians. Traditional accounts from primary sources claim it took 30 to 40 minutes for Johnston to die after being shot. However, the neurosurgery study highlights that an injury to the popliteal artery of that magnitude would have led to a rapid change in his level of consciousness and almost immediate death, likely within minutes, not 3/4 of an hour. The rapid exsanguination meant that by the time anyone, including Johnston himself, realized he was bleeding, he was already in irreversible hemorrhagic shock. Johnston's presence was a calculated risk, born of tactical desperation. The Confederate attack was stalling, and the green, untested troops required the highly visible inspiration of their commander to move forward. In the context of 19th century warfare, leading from the front was sometimes the only viable way to break a tactical deadlock. One must not ignore the grim realities, the dense terrain, and the intense command pressures he faced in the Western theater. The loss of Albert Sidney Johnston was a devastating blow to the Confederacy. His death demoralized the Southern Army and arguably altered the trajectory of the war in the West. But as we reflect on the tragedy of Shiloh, we must separate romanticized Victorian myths from historical and medical facts. Medical evidence confirms his sciatic nerve was not fully severed, and he retained sensation in his lower extremities. Understanding these realities provides a clearer, more accurate picture of the brutal, fast-paced, and unforgiving nature of the American Civil War. This newly uncovered fact is definitely a Civil War rarity, and we thank you for joining us today.
All right. And guys, we're privileged to have join us today Dr. Justin Pruitt. Justin is a friend of ours and here to lend a little bit of medical expertise into our podcast today. Bill, you were just over there at Shiloh a couple of weeks ago. You walked this ground. What do you think about 20, 30 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes? What do you think?
It certainly wasn't 4 or 5 minutes. For him to get from where he was, the National Park Service believes he was wounded on the Hamburg-Purdy Road, over to the upturned Cannon Monument that marks his death site. 250 meters-ish from where they think he was wounded on the road to that site. There's no way to, telling Schmidlap and Private Snuffy to, go out there and keep shooting those damn Yankees, and telling Colonel Acosta to move his regiment to the right or the left. No. The battlefield activities that he was probably conducting between those 2 points, that's more than, 4 or 5 minutes. It just has to be. Yeah.
Doctor, what do you think? With a wound like that? 4 to 5?
Yeah, I think it said that if it was a complete clean sever, that he could bleed out within 3 to 5 minutes, and I think that's possible. But based on what Bill said, and the fact that there's always in medicine, it's hardly ever clear cut. So sure. There was probably a partial tear of the artery, not a complete clean sever, which would have slowed things down a little bit. and probably taken a little longer to.
Yeah. So, what do you think? You think he felt that? You think it was just pure adrenaline, or do you think there was actually damage from the duel?
So that's a good point, and I think the point that they made about the stress-induced analgesia, I think is a very good, important point. I guess the hypothesis was for years that it was the dueling injury that led to him not understanding or not realizing that he was severely injured, which is why he didn't use a tourniquet that I guess he potentially had with him.
Yeah. What do you?
Yeah, I mean, he had a tourniquet in his pocket, and it was not used. And his doctor, his personal physician, had been dropped off at Prentice's camp as they were moving across the battlefield to treat some Union and Confederate wounded soldiers. So his personal physician wasn't there. They realized that he'd been wounded. But when they did, they pulled him off his horse and they started ripping his jacket open, his vest, his shirt. They were looking for an injury on the body, and they never did find it. And it was, obviously behind his knee. So, yeah, it would have been nice to have, applied that tourniquet. It, very well could have saved his life.
I mean, and maybe if you even don't include the tourniquet, he was a cavalryman. He wore cavalry boots, right? So probably if his knee was bent, the upper portion of the boot, a firm upper, would have been pushed into the wound area and probably kind of acting like a pressure point.
That could have been another reason that it delayed the time for him to exsanguinate, as Bill said. Any pressure applied above a wound is going to slow down his demise. So anything that could have applied pressure might have affected the time that it took for him to ultimately pass away. But I do think that the reason him not using the tourniquet probably is one of the main drivers in this hypothesis that it must have been the dueling. He must not have known it was there. It must have been the dueling injury. But if you look at where the nerve that goes and supplies sensation to the back of the knee or to the popliteal fossa, it comes from the posterior femorocutaneous nerve, which is not actually part of the sciatic nerve, which was noted to be damaged. Now, they're in close proximity, and it could have still suffered some damage. But as you pointed out, I think earlier, him being a cavalryman, that nerve does supply sensation to the entire back of the leg down to the knee. And so he never had a record of pressure sores. He never had a record of having any other injuries related to poor sensation in his 20 plus years since the injury. So
it didn't stop him from riding and moving around, so
right,
not that bad.
So, and there's also other nerves around that area that supply the general area of skin with sensation. So I think to say that is the complete reason that he negated to recognize this injury is probably not true. I think the being in the intense throes of battle led to that stress-induced analgesia, probably played more of a role than his dueling injury.
Yeah. It's definitely not the first time that's happened in history, so we know it has happened, and more likely it probably happened to him too.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, I would say I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. You can join us next month. I'm going to go out solo, a little bit of a field trip myself, going out to Nathan Bedford Forrest's boyhood home and his birthplace. Unfortunately, Bill can't make it, but I did want to say thanks to Dr. Pruitt for coming out and taking a look at this, playing medical detective.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. If you need me to weigh in on any other dueling injuries, I can do that.
I do have one up my sleeve, but I'm going to hold that one off till later. In the meantime, we just want to say, everybody, thank you for joining us, and please remember to support your local Civil War roundtables, your fraternal organizations, such as the Sons of Confederate Veterans, Sons of Union Veterans. And for the ladies out there, don't forget, you have United Daughters of the Confederacy and whatnot that you can also support. Learn a little bit more about history.
Yeah, do something.
That's right. Have fun out there, and we'll see you guys next month.
Yeah, see you next month, guys.
Thank you for watching and supporting Civil War Rarities. We hope to see you again soon for our next episode.